Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor for this unexpected video. So, this morning I had quite an experience. So, I was invited very kindly by MJ onto her channel, Reading This Life, to do a live stream video. I should have known it wouldn't turn out all that great because, you know, me and live streams, it never works out. So my internet tends to work fairly well until I need to do any kind of live stream or Zoom chat or anything like that. Then things go horribly wrong. And indeed, they went horribly wrong this morning. So sorry, MJ, that it was a catastrophe. And it was. It was a catastrophe. And I did manage to answer some of the questions that she had for me. I think I answered like 6 questions. It only took an hour. Now, why did everything go so wrong this morning? Well, it's all Roger's fault. Roger, why are you so bitter and mean? So, Roger is still mad at me for being on the 500 book challenge. Roger, as you might know, was in charge of buying all of my books. And he loved it. He loves, you know, a couple things. He loves to buy books. He loves to murder and eat people. There are a couple things he really enjoys in life. Or undeath. You know, there are a couple things he really likes doing. And I took one of those things away. And he's been bitter since then. Because the 500 book challenge that I'm on, I have to read 500 books I already own before I'll buy any new ones. So that just screwed that up. Sorry, Roger, but really, do you have to be so bitter and angry? I guess he does. So this morning, as soon as I went into the other room, that was my big mistake, going into the other room to film this or to record this live stream, be on this live stream with MJ. Roger decided to use his magical powers to destroy my internet. He wanted to destroy the internet completely, but he was only able to destroy it partially. It kept going on and off all this morning. So we did, you know, I was sort of there on the live stream, you know, frozen in place. But Roger wasn't able to completely demolish the whole thing because he lent his copy of the Necronomicon to Ollie at CriminOlly, because Ollie wants to use it to travel to other universes and conquer the multiverse. Or something like that. Anyway, he lent the Necronomicon to Ollie. Which I think, you know, is a bad idea, but, you know, what's the worst that can happen? Anyway, Garbogast could never end. I guess that's the worst that could happen. But he was out. He was without the Necronomicon. So he was, you know, he was... But he did the best he could do. So even with a very poor substitute for the Necronomicon. So I promised this morning that I would return with an emergency Q&A. There were a few questions I wasn't able to answer, and there were some questions from audience members who weren't able to get their questions through because, you know, the whole thing was a smoking mess. So I will now answer some questions. Now, I know I'm doing this early because I want to get this up so people can see it this evening if they want to. I don't know why you would, considering, but, you know, if you do, here it is. You know, my channel is a disaster. If you come within 30 feet of my channel, watch out, because it's just going to be a mess. Anyway, here are some questions that I will now answer. Now, I put a community post where I asked for questions. If you have any further questions, go ahead and put them on there, and I will do another one of these in the near future and get to those questions. I promise. So here are some questions. There are a couple questions from the live stream that I wasn't really able to answer because I was too busy being frozen. One question was by Read by Fred, the great channel, Read by Fred, fantastic channel. Read by Fred asked, Fred of Read by Fred, asked, "Can you tell us how you obtained Roger? Was it a Halloween purchase?" So insulting. Did he find you? Well, I've told this story before, at least a version of this story. I've never told the whole truth, so here it goes. Long ago, Roger Hotep. 10,000 years ago, Roger Hotep was Pharaoh of Egypt. He was the greatest king of all time. The mightiest monarch who ever lived. Unfortunately, Roger Hotep also had a fascination with the dark arts. Yes, sorcery. He was very interested in sorcery. And so, despite being just a fantastic king that everybody loved, he was brought low by this fascination with sorcery because another terrifying and terrible sorcerer was jealous of Roger Hotep and Roger Hotep's vast knowledge of the dark arts. And that would, of course, be the dark sorcerer Edgar. Edgar the Evil. So Edgar the Evil used his copy of the dreaded Necronomicon to kill. He literally murdered him. He killed Roger Hotep and destroyed his memory. All trace of Roger Hotep was caused to vanish. It disappeared. Which is why when you read your history books, you won't find any mention of the greatest pharaoh of all, Roger Hotep. But then, one day in 1937, when I was an archaeologist way back then when I was young in 1937. Why, back then, I knew about Roger Hotep from some forbidden papyrus scrolls that somehow escaped the evil Edgar's wrongdoing. And I was searching for the tomb of Roger Hotep with the help of my good friend, Professor Jones. So Professor Jones and myself, we finally, after years of searching, in 1937, we found the tomb of Roger Hotep. And I took Roger Hotep to the museum, just intending to leave him there. But some traces of sorcery were still left in Roger Hotep. And he was able to contact me, with his remaining psychic powers. And I managed to smuggle out a copy of the Necronomicon from Miskatonic University. And I used a spell to revive Roger Hotep. And look at him. He's as good as new. He looks as good as he ever did. I mean, he's undead and he has, an undying appetite for the flesh of human beings. But nobody's perfect. Let's not judge. So, Roger, he lives again. He lives again. Anyway, I hope that answers your question, Fred. Where are we at now? Oh yeah, J. Scott Phillips was asking about the picture that was behind me during the live streams. This is the picture in question. I do not know the name or the title of this picture. I just don't know it. And I never really thought to ask. The artist is Tony DiMartile. This was done by the artist Tony DiMartile, who is a very nice fellow. I know Tony, and he's pretty awesome. And he made this very nice picture, which is in my dining room. All right, that was that. Now, where were we? Okay, Medium John Silver, who is a viewer who has been commenting on my channel and some other channels for a long time. He's a very loyal and wonderful viewer, Medium John Silver. And his question is, Michael, since you are compelled to read books cover to cover, does that make you steer away from collected work volumes such as Library of America or the complete tales of Edgar Allan Poe? Yes and no. So, it never did in the past. Because until I started on BookTube, it didn't really matter how long it took me to read a book. I'd never even thought about it. And I am compelled, it is true, I am compelled to read a book from the first page to the last page. No matter what it is, whether it's an anthology of some kind or anything. It's just a compulsion. And I love Library of America and have a bunch of Library of America books. And yeah, when I would read one, I would pick one up. I'd read it from the start to finish. But since I've been on BookTube, it sort of matters a little bit more, or a lot more, how quickly I get through books because of things like BookTube events. You know, it's June on the Range. I've got to read so many Westerns. And so since I've been on BookTube, it's true, I have kind of backed away from work or books like the Library of America or just big anthologies just because of the time it would take, because I just can't read part and put it down because I'm just, what can I tell you? It's a compulsion. But that is different from how I've always read books in the past before BookTube. So it's a quandary. I'm going to have to figure that out. I'm going to have to work on that because, you know, I love actually the Library of America and books like that. I love those big multi-book collections. And like I said, in the past, I never had a problem, but now sort of, yeah, I have to work it out. Number 2. Alice asks, what is Roger's favorite book? I don't know. What's your favorite book? What? What's the Book of the Dead? That sounds creepy. The book of the Dead, whatever the hell that is. Roger, you know, Roger's he's a little peculiar. Okay. Number 3. Where do you recommend starting with Superman? This is Al Hartman, 4527. Al Hartman asks, where do you recommend starting with Superman? Okay, hold on a second. Okay, I'm back. I had to go grab a book because I forgot to bring it in here. This whole thing I just threw together, obviously. Okay, where to start with Superman comics? Now, here's the thing. This is a character who's been around for 80-something years now. He's been around a long, long time, Superman. And he's gone through some changes. It's hard to point to one story and say, start here. Because, you know, there are literally thousands of Superman stories. Recently, for the World's Finest Challenge, where I've been reading Batman and Superman comics every day, it's kind of been rammed home to me just how different a lot of periods of Superman's history are. And so it's kind of hard to choose just one. So what I would do, this is my recommendation. I would pick up one of the best of anthologies, and the one I'd probably pick up if you can get it, and you probably still can, is this one. This is Superman, A Celebration of 75 Years. Came out a few years ago, obviously. This is the one I would pick up, because this has not only a selection of stories from his history, but it has a couple of the best stories from Superman's history. It's got... Well, for one thing, it has this great Gil Kane story. This is from Action Comics number 544? Yeah, number 544. And this is just a great Brainiac story with Luthor. It's just, that one's really, really good. But it's got some other really great stories in here, including this one, which was in this Superman annual. And this is The Man Who Has Everything. And if you've seen a couple of the videos that I've done recently and Steve Donahue has done recently, you might have heard about this particular story. By far one of the best Superman stories ever. It also has one story that I really, really like, What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. That was a really good story, but it also has some other stuff which which is really good if you're encountering Superman for the first time, like the first appearance of Superman. And you can see just how different the Golden Age Superman was in his first appearance. It's got some other old stories, and moving into the Silver Age, including my favorite Superman story, one of my favorite Superman stories of all time. Not my favorite, but close. So something like this, will give you an idea of the character and all the changes that the character has gone through and what period you might really like to read further from the character. I think this is a good place to start myself. There is a newer edition of this. Was it the 85th anniversary or the 80th anniversary? I don't remember. There's a newer collected edition which is even bigger than this, which is really, really good. That would work too. I think this one might be better for a first-time Superman fan, though, or for a first-time reader, I should say. You will become a fan, obviously, if you read it, because, it's Superman. Why wouldn't you? Okay, that's the answer to that question. Username McUsernameFace. Username McUsernameFace has this question. If you've read it, what are your thoughts on Dostoevsky's The Idiot? It's been too long. It's been too long, and that's something I'm really going to have to pick up, read, and then I'll tell you. And I will do that soon. I will do that this year, specifically because you've asked this question, and I don't have an answer for you right now. Plagued by Visions, my good friend Juan at Plagued by Visions, one of the greatest BookTube channels of all time. It's one of the greatest of all time, certainly. And he's been a wonderful friend to me the entire time I've been on BookTube. He has this disturbing question because, he's all about disturbing fiction, disturbing books, and he gives me a disturbing question, so let's read it. If all your books disappeared, would you start your collection again from zero or just move on? What essential books would you start reconstructing your library with first? Well, this is a dreadful thought, but let's think about it since he asked this question. It's an important question because this happens. If something like this were to happen, it would have to be something on the order of a flood or a fire or some kind of disaster like that. I highly doubt thieves would break into my house and steal books. Books are probably the last thing thieves would come in and steal. Although I suppose it's possible. Let's just say thieves broke into the manor and stole all my books. Let's just say that. So I have well over 2,000 books. And I have that many because I've been buying books my whole life. But here's the thing about ownership in general. Ownership is kind of a myth. You don't really own anything. The best you can do is rent access to stuff for a while, because eventually either you're gone or your stuff is gone. You will be separated from your stuff in one way or another at some point. So it's a temporary arrangement. So it's entirely possible you can lose everything, including your books. If I did, I wouldn't even attempt just to try to replace my collection. A lot of my collection is irreplaceable, particularly a lot of the comic book stuff, actually. So just replacing it seems impossible. It would cost literally a fortune, because I've probably over decades, because I'm an old man, you saw me in that picture from 1937. I'm an old guy, and so I look good because of spells. It's true. What are you laughing at? Anyway, I wouldn't even attempt to try to replace this stuff. What I would do is the one good thing is that the 500 book challenge would be over, right? And you can buy books again. I guess if there's a silver lining, that's it. What I would do, though, is I would go to the bookstore. I would buy, say, 5 or 6 books. I would take them home. I'd read them. I'd go back to the bookstore, get another 5 or 6 books. I would read them, and there you go. And maybe I would keep some of the books that I really liked, and maybe I would get rid of the books I didn't really like, because, I wouldn't even have any kind of collection then. I think that's what I would do, because I'm going to be a reader no matter what. If I'm a collector, I'm kind of a collector by accident. And the accident is that I read a lot of books and I just hold on to the books that I've read. And I tend to pick up a lot of books, or have in the past, picked up thousands of books that I intended to read at some point in the future. But I think that would change if all my books vanished. I think I would just buy a few at a time. I would read them. I'd buy a few more. I'd read them. And that's what I would do for the rest of my life. I don't think I would attempt at all to replace the irreplaceable. And he does ask, what would be the essential books? I would end up getting those again because those would be books that mean something to me, and that means I would want to read them again eventually. Books like Dracula. I reread Dracula every few years, at least. So yeah, I would buy a copy of Dracula and I would read it. Same goes for Robert E. Howard's Conan. I would find an edition of Conan. One of the editions I've talked about recently, you remember, Sumerian September is coming. And I would just, read it and buy more books. But, only a few at a time. It would be a whole different thing. It'd be a whole different thing. My channel would be a disaster, You would not have much of a background if I didn't have books. But that's a good and disturbing question from Plagued by Visions. King60142 has a question. Have you read Vanity Fair by William Thackeray? No. I'm not very literate. I haven't read Vanity Fair. That's stupid. Why haven't I read I should read Vanity Fair. Yeah, I should do that. I'm going to get right on that. Any minute now, I'm going to pick up that book. I'm sure I have a copy of Vanity Fair around here. I actually do. I do have a copy of it, but I haven't. It's over there with my Jane Austen books. Man, I'm going to get to those any minute now. Where was I? BJ Minton has a question. I know you like mostly vintage books. What's your favorite fiction book? Not comics. What do you have against comics, man? What's your favorite fiction book? Not comics. Published, not self-published in this century. So, what do you have against self-published books? Of course, the first thing I think of is a self-published book. Of course it is. Which would be a book by Troy Tradeup. Troy Tradeup, the author of the one book I would choose for this, which is The Forsaken Boy, which is a great werewolf novel. One of the greatest werewolf novels. Probably the greatest werewolf novel of the 21st century. I think his book came out, originally it was self-published, I think around 10 or 11 years ago. But man, is that book good. So I would, if you would allow me, I would say The Forsaken Boy by Troy Tradeup. But you're not. You're not allowing me to say that. So do I have another book? Oh, here it is. I have it right here. So this is the book I would choose. Now, this is not the greatest book I've read. This is not the best book. But this is the book I would choose. It's me. I would choose this one. This is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. And I loved this book. I really loved this book. I'm not saying it's the best book, but I really, really enjoyed it. So, yeah, Joe Abercrombie for the win and Best Served Cold. So there you go. That's that. All right. Oh, here's a question from Back Away from the Donkey. Back Away from the Donkey asked, would you rather read 50 Shades of Grey or The Da Vinci Code? Oh, that's a tough question. I think 50 Shades of Grey is shorter. So if I had to torture myself, I'd might as well be a book like that, 50 Shades of Grey. I hear there are like dirty parts in that too, Roger. So we would both like it, I would get Roger to read it and he can do his own audiobook version of that. That would be crazy. I think, does anybody have a copy of 50 Shades of Grey? I want Roger to do an audiobook for that. That would be awesome. Anyway, that's my answer. Konstantinos asks, what's your favorite heavy metal band? That would be Iron Maiden. He also asks, do you like Weird Menace? Do you like Weird Menace? Any favorite Weird Menace writers? Mine would be either Zagat or Hugh B. Cave. Well, we think along similar lines because mine would be Hugh B. Cave. This is Hugh B. Cave's book, Death Stalks the Night. Death Stalks the Night. When was this published? Because I read this shortly after I bought it, and I'm trying to remember when the hell that was. Let's see, does it have a date in here? Yes, copyright 1995. I didn't read it that long ago. I read it it was shortly after I moved into the manor. So it had to have been around 2001 or 2002. It was a while ago. I am due to reread Death Stalks the Night. I remember how much I enjoyed this book. I've read some other Hugh B. Cave stuff since then. And so, yeah, I'm going to go for Cave. Cave for the win! Okay. Len, is this Len of 3? Len of 3. Do you have any recommendations of lesser-known authors who wrote short stories for pulp magazines like Black Mask, Argosy, Weird Tales, Dime, Detective, and Adventure? If so, do you also have any recommendations for books that collect their work? Well, this answer is going to require a video of its own. And since you've asked that question, I'm going to make this video and put this video up probably next week or the week after. But let's just give a quick answer with a couple writers that just spring to mind. One being Hugh B. Cave. And Hugh B. Cave, this book might be a little hard to find nowadays. You can find his stuff on ebook though, which is something I'm going to be talking about in that video. Because there are some authors that you can find as ebooks that you can't find easily, at least in physical form. There are some books you can only get in physical form, but you can't get as ebooks. As a reader, as a reader of this old stuff, it's handy to have both an e-reader of some kind and be a reader of physical books. There are some people who are like, no, I'm only going to do one or the other. I love this. To me, it's handy to read just any format you can get your hands on, particularly these old writers. The first writer that came to mind was Henry Whitehead, actually, who wrote in Weird Tales along with H.P. Lovecraft and some other writers, and I never hear him talked about. He's Henry S. Whitehead, right? I've got it right here. Henry S. Whitehead. And you can sometimes find Henry S. Whitehead in different places. I actually have a couple stories in this. This is from Barnes & Noble, of all things. This is classic horror stories, which is a big, gaudy, cheesy-looking, leather-bound volume, faux leather, I'm sure, of horror stories. But one thing about this collection from Barnes & Noble, it's dynamite. This is a great collection. And it has these are just essential horror stories, classic horror stories. And you can find them all in this book. This book is so good. I was so impressed with its contents. And, it's got Ambrose Bierce, Bram Stoker, Guy de Maupassant, Robert Louis Stevenson. It's got everybody. William Hope Hodgson, Arthur Conan Doyle, Robert W. Chambers, E.F. Benson. It's everybody you want, including Henry S. Whitehead, which is in here with Passing of a God and Cassius, 2 stories from Henry S. Whitehead, a writer I recommend. I will talk more about him in that video. There's also Frederick Neville, which I have a couple books by. These, I think, this is the Gales and McGill series of stories. This is Volume 1, 1927 to 29, and Volume 2, 1930 to 31. And these were aviators. These were adventurous aviators, And he also published a bunch of detective fiction, which unfortunately I didn't buy before I went on the 500 book challenge, which ruined my live stream. So, inadvertently. But yeah, Frederick Neville is an author I could recommend. This is an author you will sometimes hear talked about and isn't really forgotten by people who like this kind of stuff, but he is sort of forgotten, and that would be Seabury Quinn. He is the creator of Jules de Grandin, the greatest supernatural investigator, the greatest occult detective, in my opinion. Jules de Grandin, my favorite. So pulpy. These stories are so pulpy. There's a 5-volume set. There's also a best of volume of Seabury Quinn. Seabury Quinn also wrote a bunch of stories in Weird Tales that were not Jules de Grandin. And so while he's not really completely forgotten, he is tremendously underrated, and he's not mentioned all that much. There are others, and I will mention them in the near future. So there's that. That reading guy has a question. Is this the last question? This is the last question. That reading guy asks, who is sexier? A certain 28-year-old booktuber, or Roger without his mummy wrap? Well, the 28-year-old booktuber is obviously Steve Donahue. Steve Donahue is 28 years old and has been for decades. Now, is Steve Donahue sexier than Roger? Let's be honest, nobody's sexier than Roger. So those are the answers that I was not able to answer this morning in the terrible live stream that went all wrong. Sorry again, MJ, for the live from hell. It's all Roger's fault. But I do want to thank MJ for giving me the opportunity to go on her show, because she is one of the best booktubers out there. She's wonderful. And I know people love to go on her show. And I was actually pretty excited to go on her show and do a live stream because she's awesome, one of my favorites. But no, it all had to go horribly wrong. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed it. I will catch you next time.